Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, which will cover findings from the November 2023 Emerging Technology Survey, or ETS for short. This is the fourth and final ETS survey period for this calendar year, and the full findings report and replay of this webinar will be available for clients on the ETR research platform by the end of the day. Polling for this ETS survey was conducted from October 24th until November 16th and captured a record level of participation yet again from nearly 1,550 IT decision makers, including 275 from Fortune 500 companies and 378 from Global 2000 organizations. Of all respondents, 73% hold C-suite or director level titles. By industry size, roughly 64% represent large organizations and 36% hail from small to medium-sized enterprises. The ETS currently tracks over 450 emerging technology vendors and frameworks. Survey respondents are prompted with the following answer options to gauge awareness, evaluation, utilization, and churn metrics. First, we have our two evaluation metrics, which are plan to evaluate and currently evaluating. Second, we have our two utilization metrics, which are evaluated, plan to utilize, and allocating further. Next, we have our awareness metric, which is being aware of the vendor, but with no plans to evaluate. And lastly, we have our two churn metrics, which are evaluated, no plan to utilize, and replaced or put in containment. Throughout the webinar, the ETR team will be discussing a proprietary net sentiment metric that helps aggregate the aforementioned metrics into a single number. In its simplest form, we are aggregating the positive metrics and then subtracting that with the negative metrics. In addition, our proprietary mindshare metric represents overall enterprise pervasion and awareness within our sample. That metric is calculated by aggregating the evaluation, utilization, and the evaluated no plan to utilize citations, and then dividing that sum by the unique sector respondents. We will get into more sector and vendor-specific data shortly, but let's begin with a broader look across our survey universe for outperformers by the various sentiment metrics I just described. This slide shows mindshare on the x-axis and net sentiment on the y-axis, and focuses on those vendors and technologies with higher overall mindshare. And then we'll take a look at the smaller mindshare vendors in the following slide. Here we see that OpenAI remains the net sentiment leader, and other ML AI players such as Hugging Face, TensorFlow, Databricks, Anaconda, and Jasper are also strongly positioned. The container orchestration technology Kubernetes leads with the highest mindshare, and another container player, Docker, is very well positioned with the fourth highest net sentiment among this grouping. And as always, security vendors are well represented in this analysis, with names you will be hearing a lot of in this report, including OneTrust, Snyk, Wiz, BeyondTrust, Netskope, Abnormal Security, HackerOne, Salt Security, Security Scorecard, and 1Password. Now, before we move on, we need to highlight the phenomena that continues to be OpenAI, who now holds the highest net sentiment and second highest mindshare in its fourth ETS iteration. I do want to quickly point out that this survey closed prior to the recent drama that was played out in the media headlines. There will be much more on OpenAI later on this webinar when our colleague Jake details the ML AI sector. Moving on to the smaller mindshare end of the spectrum, another open source technology has lost its top spot, with Istio being taken over by ML AI vendor Anthropic as the net sentiment leader. Another Gen AI player, Cohere, has also showed up strong in the third spot overall. This is just the second ETS iteration for both Anthropic and Cohere, showing that the Gen AI evaluation trend is more than a one vendor party. Without calling out any specific names, you can see here highlighted in red the sheer number of smaller mindshare vendors that have single-digit or negative net sentiment scores in this survey period was worth highlighting. In the next two slides, we look at which vendors saw the largest net sentiment improvements and declines since our last ETS survey in August. There are a lot of new names on this list versus last year, but none stand out as much as the significant improvements seen by LogRocket, BrightEdge, and D'Amica, all of which captured the largest improvements in their consecutive net sentiment scores. It should be noted that D'Amica was among the larger sequential declines in our last survey, so kudos to them for a strong reversal in their ranking among our IT decision maker community. While these large survey over survey improvements should be applauded, the ability to grow off an already high base is even more impressive. And that is exactly what ML AI players Hugging Face and Anthropic were able to do in this survey's data set. Now for the most significant survey over survey net sentiment declines, the biggest declines came from MX, LaunchDarkly, and Tamir, with two data governance players, Druva and Colibra, also capturing sizable declines since the prior survey. In the next two slides, we apply the same analysis, but with a different metric, and examine which vendors saw the largest mindshare improvements and declines since August. With strong expansion in mindshare, RippleNet, RapidSOS, and Netlify lead this analysis. Meanwhile, already well-established players like Canva and Redis Labs also saw improvements off of already strong mindshare levels. Also of note, Hugging Face appears again, after also being highlighted previously as one of the higher net sentiment improvers as well. The more dubious award of largest mindshare contraction goes to SkyTap and Dialpad, although both vendors still retain very high overall mindshare positioning among our survey sample. Moving on to the very critical evaluation component, we apply a similar analysis where we plot the mind share of the respective sector on the x-axis and the evaluation rate on the y-axis, with those vendors being highlighted in green, holding evaluation rates in the top 10th percentile. First, let's address OpenAI again. In its debut ETS this past February, OpenAI smashed ETS historical citation and evaluation records, and then increased its standing in both metrics again during the next survey. However, the August 23 ETS captured metrics that were in line with the previous iteration, as did this survey period yet again. While this could be viewed as a potential pause in the vendor's evaluation growth, the consistent and sizable gains in the percentage of respondents indicating their plans to allocate further resources to OpenAI tells the real story. Our ITDM community is progressing along the path from awareness to evaluation and now into production, with almost 19% of respondents stating plans to allocate further resources to OpenAI this survey period. That is up from 13% and 9% in the last two sequential periods. That is more than 100% growth in this very critical metric over just the last 6 months. As for the other positives, more ML AI players are in the mix here, with Jasper, Hugging Face, and Anthropic making the cut. Lastly, some very well-established but still private names such as Cohesity, Rubrik, Databricks, and BeyondTrust are also well-positioned in terms of evaluation rates. In the next slide, we will zoom in on the crowded box you see here to call out some additional companies. And those companies happen to include a bevy of information security players, including, again, Sneak, Salt Security, Wiz, HackerOne, Abnormal Security, and Arctic Wolf. Many of these vendors have become permanent fixtures in this analysis, such as Sneak, who has landed here for the 5th consecutive quarter. Audit Board again shows very strong evaluation rates. And one last name worth highlighting is LogRocket, which saw the largest jump in evaluation rates versus 3 months ago of any vendor in our survey universe. As advertised, LogRocket holds the highest evaluation improvement, which is quite a feat if you recall that the vendor also held the highest net sentiment improvement, as well as holding a spot in the highest mindshare improvement analysis as well. This November 23 ETS survey period is a very strong showing for the product analytics vendor, and hopefully someone on the ETR Enterprise Service team is reaching out to them right now so they can see this outstanding competitive intelligence data for themselves. Now we take a similar approach to the key utilization rates, which includes those survey respondents who have evaluated and plan to utilize the vendor or are already allocating further resources to it. Not surprising, given their free entry level pricing, the open source vendors and technologies like Kubernetes dominate the top levels of this analysis. However, outside of open source names, we see the triumvirate of Figma, Miro, Canva, and as well as Databricks showing strong representation here. And quickly looking at the top utilization improvements, ML/AI players OpenAI, Cohere, and Anaconda are atop the list yet again. Hugging Face also jumped higher from an already strong level. On a more pessimistic note, the next two slides depict those vendors with the highest and worsening churn rates. As a reminder, churn encapsulates those survey respondents who evaluated and have no plans to utilize or have already decided to not use or replace the vendor outright. Mural makes this nefarious list for the second consecutive quarter, seeing one of the highest churn rates, along with Calendly and Nasuni. Cohesity is seeing some of the highest churn rates across the survey universe for the fourth consecutive ETS survey period. As far as churn rate increases, we see that LaunchDarkly, Aerospike, and Druva saw the largest increase in churn rates since the August 2023 ETS. As alluded to in the previous slide, Calendly saw its churn rate increase from already high levels, rising from 14% to 17% since the last survey. And lastly, we'll touch upon a more positive analysis, which is the highest conversion rates. This takes the two utilization metrics and divides that by the two churn metrics, or more simply put, those who are using versus those who have decided not to use the vendor post-evaluation. Again, this analysis is dominated by the open source names, along with the omnipresent pairing of Figma and Miro. Databricks, Stripe, and OneTrust also show up yet again, and Hugging Face and OpenAI are notably emerging as conversion rate leaders as well. While that concludes our higher level overview across the entire ETS survey, we will now move on to some additional sector and vendor specific data that clients have requested, specifically including information security, data warehousing, data analytics, and of course ML/AI, beginning with our analyst and colleague, Jake Fabrizio.
Thanks, Eric. Next up is the machine learning and artificial intelligence sector. Within the sector, OpenAI continues to outpace peers in both net sentiment and mindshare by a wide margin. Hugging Face, TensorFlow, and Databricks hold the next highest net sentiment scores. Anthropic also registers a relatively strong net sentiment, but mindshare remains low at this point in time, near 10%. Next up, we'll take a look at the highest utilization to churn ratios within the ML/AI sector, and we see some familiar faces again. The top 5 vendors in this analysis are Hugging Face, OpenAI, TensorFlow, Anthropic, and Databricks, respectively. Meanwhile, vendors exhibiting the most growth in this metric include Hugging Face, Anthropic, and Jasper. Now we'll take a look at the aggregate metrics for a few top performers within the sector, starting with OpenAI. As we can see, once again, OpenAI captures growth across the board as net sentiment and mindshare continue to grow materially, and notably among those indicating to allocate further. By now, 72% of OpenAI respondents indicate a positive citation, either evaluation or utilization. However, it is important to note that ETS polling for this period closed before the OpenAI board drama shook out. In a flash poll, IT decision makers noted overall skepticism and a lack of confidence in vendors in the nation field. At this point in time, they say that there is no set winner in the space and that allegiances could still shift. We eagerly await our next survey period and our January spending intentions survey to further assess any impacts on OpenAI. Next up, we'll take a look at Hugging Face, which holds the second highest net sentiment within the sector. Looking at this analysis, it's clear to see a material rebound in net sentiment for the vendor, as well as a jump in mindshare. Heightened negative citations have virtually disappeared from the sample, and more respondents indicate plans to evaluate or allocate spend with Hugging Face, which drives net sentiment up to the right. Finally, let's take a quick look at Anthropic, which has been garnering some buzz and interest here at ETR in its second ETS survey appearance. Anthropic's net sentiment has increased by 12 percentage points since last survey period as negative citations contract. Additionally, the proportion of respondents planning to allocate further spend on the vendor has increased, driving net sentiment up. Mindshare has also grown. We'll continue to keep a close eye on the ML/AI sector and vendors in our work as the space continues to evolve in real time. But for now, I'll pass the mic back over to my colleague Eric to discuss information security leaders.
And now moving on to the information security portion of the show. As ETR subscribers and community members know, security has remained the top priority for ETR survey respondents since September of 2020. This prioritization trend has driven mindshare among security vendors in the ETS to peak levels in 2023. In this survey, 9 security subsectors showed higher mindshare levels than they did in August of 23. In addition to the mindshare, most subsectors are showing flattening in net sentiment, with only privacy management platforms, container security, and digital risk above a 20% net sentiment score. Digital risk captured a sizable increase from 16% in the prior survey to 21%. The full ETS security data is available on the ETR platform and is based on 1,120 ID decision makers that cited a response in the information security sector. The ETS covers almost 100 private information security vendors, so the best way to dig into the data details is on our platform. Given the overwhelming breadth of coverage, this part of the report examines sector-wide data and shows similar names dominating the landscape. OneTrust leads all vendors in net sentiment, followed by Snyk and Wiz. 1Password, BeyondTrust, Arctic Wolf, and OneTrust also lead in mindshare. One interesting aspect of this data set is the new entry of Protect AI, which captured the 4th highest net sentiment score across the entire sector, despite having a mindshare percentage barely over 10%. Here we switch to the ETS custom filtering dashboard. Although not shown on this slide, across the entire ETS survey universe, 13 of the 20 vendors with the highest levels of plan to evaluate indications are in the information security sector. On this slide, we see the highest ranking of our allocating further metric across the entire information security sector, which essentially means that these vendors have moved beyond the evaluation phase and are actively in production. BitSight, OneTrust, 1Password, and BeyondTrust lead this group with the highest percentage of respondents indicating plans to allocate further resources. Dropping below the double-digit threshold, but still in healthy territory, are Wiz, Netscope, Tanium, Security Scorecard, and Sneak. Lastly, Abnormal, Savient, Cribble, Arctic Wolf, and JumpCloud are also well positioned in this analysis. Showing off one of the features of our data visualization dashboard, check out this proprietary analysis where ETR tracks utilization versus churn ratios for today's top private tech companies. Basically, this ratio should be interpreted as a vendor's ability to retain customers post-evaluation. And the best performers in this analysis are OneTrust, Sneak, Axonius, Wiz, and BitSight. Other vendors rounding out the top 10 include BeyondTrust, Netscope, Cribble again, and 1Password. The honorable mention award goes to Savient, which has grown its positioning from the 28th percentile to the 61st over the last 12 months. And that was before the Okta breach. And that's a wrap on security as we transition back over to the melodious charms of our colleague, Dr. Darren Brabham, to cover the data warehousing and analytics subsectors. Back to you, Darren.
Turning to the database data warehousing software sector, familiar names continue to dominate. Open source relational database management system PostgreSQL is the clear net sentiment and mindshare leader. Further behind, but still far ahead of the rest of the pack in both net sentiment and mindshare, is Redis Labs. Neo4j and InfoWorks occupy the third and fourth spots, and Imply Druid lags at the back of the pack in this sector with the lowest mindshare and net sentiment. On this slide, we see ETR's proprietary utilization to churn ratio, which is a ratio of a vendor's existing customers to those who have walked away. It expresses a vendor's ability to retain customers after they evaluated a product. The top quartile of adjusted citations in the utilization to churn ranking we call our breakout group, and this peer group of leaders in the database data warehousing software sector consists of PostgreSQL, Redis Labs, Neo4j, and InfoWorks. PostgreSQL and Redis Labs are seeing gradual declines survey over survey and year over year in their utilization to churn ratios, while Neo4j and InfoWorks are both seeing notable improvements. Neo4j's jumped from just above the median in percentile rank up to the 75th percentile since last survey. InfoWorks, while still below the median, has made a similar gain since last survey. Not shown here, but Cockroach Labs in our third quartile of adjusted citations, as well as Timber.ai, Crate.io, and SingleStore in our second quartile of adjusted citations, are all seeing the most notable declines in their utilization to churn ratios since last survey. As a whole, the database and data warehousing subsectors are seeing net sentiment decline over the past year. So it's no surprise most vendors in these subsectors are also seeing declining net sentiments. But a few vendors in this space are bucking the trend, posting positive net sentiment changes year over year. These vendors are GridGain Systems, whose net sentiment grew 8 percentage points, InfoWorks, whose net sentiment grew 4 percentage points, Crate.io, which is up 2 percentage points, and DataStax, which went up 1 percentage point since last year. In the analytics BI big data sector, open source analytics and visualization tool Grafana is yet again the big leader in mindshare and net sentiment. Second in net sentiment is DBT Labs, and LogRocket is third. In mindshare, it's Lucidworks that has a clear second place foothold, and Fivetran and InfoWorks are neck and neck for the third spot. The lowest net sentiment in this sector belongs to Uptake, Datamir, and Mogsoft, and these vendors, like more than half of the vendors in this sector, also have single-digit mindshare. Another utilization to churn analysis here focused on the breakout group, or the top quartile of adjusted citations, this time in the analytics BI big data sector. Grafana, the net sentiment and mindshare standout in the sector, has a strong utilization to churn ratio, which is no surprise, but it has inched downward a tad over the past couple of surveys. Lucidworks is second in this ratio and well above the median, but we see substantial growth in this measure survey over survey and year over year, jumping from the 35th percentile in the November 2022 survey to the 73rd percentile this survey. Fivetran is a different story, however. While still above the median in utilization to churn ratio, it has been declining, dropping from the 80th percentile a year ago to the 57th percentile today. InfoWorks and SciSense lag much further behind in this group. The survey option to allocate further in the ETS captures respondents who have not only moved from evaluation to utilization for a vendor, but who are now committing further resources to that vendor. This custom filter view of the ETS data sorts vendors in the analytics BI big data sector by allocate further indications. At the top, yet again, we see Grafana with a 28% allocate further rate. DBT Labs is also strong here with 10% allocate further. Fivetran and Sentry stand at 9% and 8% allocate further rates, respectively. It should be noted, however, and not shown here, that Grafana and Fivetran also have some of the highest indications for replaced or in containment in this sector, both at 5% replacement rates. Their healthy utilization and evaluation rates, however, offset these numbers. And this concludes our Emerging Technology Survey Findings webinar. ETR has 3 flagship surveys we conduct multiple times a year: the Technology Spending Intentions Survey, the Emerging Technology Survey, and the Macro Views Survey, all powered by our thoroughly vetted and constantly growing ETR community of IT decision makers. We have interactive data visualizations, reports, and webinar replays from these surveys on our site. ETR also has a growing body of qualitative research from our ETR Insights interview series. These one-on-one and panel interviews with IT decision makers help tell the stories behind the data, and a searchable transcript library and associated analyst-written summaries are accessible through the reports marketplace. We also do custom surveys and focus group panels and interviews for organizations seeking best-in-class bespoke research on enterprise IT topics. And lastly, don't forget ETR has its own expert network service called ETR Connect, where you can conduct one-on-one calls with members from our IT decision maker community. Be on the lookout for sector and vendor-specific reports and the full recording from this webinar. Those are available on the ETR platform now. Until next time, take care.